Hey everybody, welcome back. Another commentary for you. If you are on the Patreon, this is something you've come to expect. If you're seeing a free video, then please use this as an opportunity to consider supporting this work on Patreon. Patreon.com/Eric Draitser is the place to go. ERICDRAITSER. On the Patreon, I have all kinds of content, including audio and video commentaries of this kind, including articles, including podcasts, and much, much, much more. $5 a month is what it costs to be a premium subscriber to get access to all of this content. Look, $5 a month is more than we pay for a lot of things, but it's less than we pay for a lot of other things. And if you value analysis of geopolitical current events, strategic issues, international relations of this kind from an anti-imperialist perspective, from the left, without any filters, without any censorship, and without any backing from corporate interests or foreign interests or anything like that, then this is the place to go. And hopefully, if you think that what I'm doing is valuable, you'll continue supporting me or consider supporting me if you're not already doing so. This kind of stuff takes a lot of time, takes a lot of work. I'm recording at 4:21 in the morning. I got two young ones asleep, and this is the time to record. So this is what's happening. So anyway, again, on the Patreon, a lot of content there. Please go over there, patreon.com/Eric Draitser to support more work coming. Anyway, all that out of the way, I want to talk about a very interesting story which probably was missed by most people as we're gearing up for the insanity of U.S. elections and so forth. But this, I thought, was a really important story to cover because it really connects to a lot of the critical issues. And I'm going to try to make sure that I keep looking at that camera up there instead of looking at my notes and elsewhere. All right, so this story came along a couple of weeks ago, and I was struck by how little attention it got. So a former general, former defense minister in Mexico, one of the highest ranking military officials in the country, has been arrested for being either a high-ranking member or a high-ranking collaborator of one of the infamous cartels in Mexico. His name, Salvador Cienfuegos Zepeda. He was arrested. He was known as a quote-unquote godfather of the H2 drug cartel. So the charges, the charges that have been brought against him here in the United States, I believe he was arrested in Los Angeles, although I could be wrong about that. The charges are pretty serious. The charges actually stem from his work from 2015 to 2017 as a general, working with the H2 drug cartel in the form of collusion. So what would he do? He would take bribes. He would secure maritime shipping routes, shipping protection, basically calling off the dogs, allowing the drug runners to move the product as need be. He would give them foreknowledge of long-term investigations. He would stifle investigations and so forth. In other words, he was their man inside. Now, I will just say at the outset that I'm not at all even close to an expert on the Mexican cartels. I'm not an expert on the history, on the sort of the incestuous relationship between them, what cartel grew out of what cartel and so forth. So the only aspect of that I'm really going to talk about is what's relevant here, and that is that the H2 cartel came out of the Beltran Leyva organization, one of the infamous cartels, which was formerly led by Juan Francisco Patron Sanchez, who was killed by Mexican Marines, interestingly. So the leader of the former group was killed by soldiers presumably under the command of Cepeda himself. I don't know the backstory there. I don't know if that was a killing that was deliberately carried out by Cepeda or at Cepeda's orders in order to help him secure his position, or if it just so happens that he led one of these campaigns in Mexico's drug war, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. Either way it goes, his connection to the H2 cartel, which grows out of that other organization at this time, certainly coincides with the death of the former leader. So that is, of course, interesting. Now, this is not the first time that a high-ranking Mexican official has been caught working with the H2 cartel. There was a former state attorney general who got 20 years for trafficking on behalf of the H2 cartel. I mean, that's pretty serious stuff. Genaro Garcia Luna, Secretary of Public Security from 2006 to 2012, also got caught for cocaine trafficking, along with two high-ranking cops, all taking bribes from the Sinaloa cartel. So you have the Sinaloa cartel bribing way up the chain of command. You have the H2 cartel working directly with the former defense minister and former general. So you're talking about corruption at the very highest levels. You're talking about drug cartels really controlling the levers of political and institutional power in Mexico, in ways that are probably pretty difficult for anybody in the United States to have a reference point for, at least in this country, because despite all of the insanity that's going on here, we don't have that level of corruption in the at least in the ranks of the military in that way, certainly on the civilian side with regard to lobbying and so forth. But within the military itself, this is something that a level of corruption that we do not have, at least not yet. So this is sort of the context for which against which I want to talk about the broader issues, because that's really where my interest in all of this lies. Again, I'm not an investigator on this subject, so I'm really relying on the research of others. But this is not the first time this has happened, and it's been about 20 years since the last time you had this major move. Again, I want to just put it in context here. This is a Mexican former defense minister, arrested in the United States and indicted on these very, very serious charges. This doesn't happen every day. The last time that something like this happened was over 20 years ago. Former general and anti-drug czar who was arrested for working with high-profile drug traffickers. I don't know why I didn't write down the name, but I've forgotten the name now. So it doesn't matter, though. The point is, 20 years ago, this happens. So that shows you just how rare something like this is. And it also, of course, raises questions about whether there is a political motivation here, how much of this is related to U.S. policy, how much is this related to AMLO, Obrador and his administration in Mexico. Probably not a lot, but that's also unclear and probably will become more clear in the coming weeks. But getting to the history here, and this is kind of to bring us forward to today and to help us to put this all into context, right? So I don't typically do analysis of these kind of stories unless it connects to broader imperialist issues, and this most certainly does. So in 2006, just so we have a full understanding of the issue here, in 2006, this is during the Bush administration, former Mexican President Calderon, he is the one who initiates the drug war, the official drug war in Mexico. And war is really the right word, because what he essentially did was he militarized the issue. The issue was already there prior to that. But what Calderon did is he basically called it formally a drug war, and then leaned primarily on the military and paramilitary law enforcement to kind of ratchet up the terror and, in theory, at least fight against the drug cartels. Of course, as we know, it's as much working with the drug cartels as it is fighting against the drug cartels. So anyway, 2006, he launches this drug war during the Bush administration. It is within, I think it was about 18 months then, that the Bush administration launches, and this is probably the key piece of information to come out of this whole commentary for you guys. 2008, Bush creates what's called the Merida Initiative. The Merida Initiative was created at the urging of former President Calderon, and the Merida Initiative is certainly a tremendous boon for weapons manufacturers, for military lobbyists, for all those who get rich selling weapons and militarizing issues around the world. So 2008 is the creation of the Merida Initiative. So in 2018, we had a nice 10-year window of data to look at. And in those 10 years, Merida cost U.S. taxpayers $3 billion. $3 billion with a B. $3 billion in money directly to militarizing Mexico's police forces and training their military in counter narcotics operations and so forth. So $3 billion, that would be military equipment, military training on Mexico's southern border, right? So that's a lot of that militarization of the southern border of Mexico that Trump has been talking about vis-a-vis the migrant caravans and all of the rest of that. Much of that has been carried out with money from the Merida initiative. They also have spent a lot on courtroom security and personnel training. I think famously we can think of things like El Chapo's escape and others where security in both in the courtrooms and also in the jails has been of vital importance. But again, I mean, that also raises corruption questions. How much of that is really controlled by corruption, or how much of that is caused by corruption? And then a lot of money spent on so-called crime prevention programs, whatever that's supposed to mean. So, excuse me, a lot to look at in 10 years in terms of where that money went. It certainly didn't go to the people of Mexico, though. That much we know for certain. So now, in the 10 years and in the $3 billion that's been spent, what has it actually produced? Well, it hasn't eliminated the cartels. It hasn't slowed them down. It hasn't reduced their growth. It hasn't even reversed their growth. What it has done is it's spiked the number of homicides in the country. The homicide rate in Mexico has skyrocketed, primarily because the militarization of the issue led the cartels to militarize. It led the cartels to become more brutal. It led the cartels to carrying out more killings. I mean, as simple as that. The violence ratcheted up. The killings ratcheted up. So now, bringing it forward to today, 14, 15 years later, we can talk about things like Ayotzinapa several years ago, where dozens and dozens and dozens of people can go missing and, obviously presumably killed by cartels, collaborators of cartels, government, infiltrators on behalf of cartels, and so forth. This is something that can happen with impunity in Mexico because, as we know from this story, high-ranking officials going all the way up to the upper echelon of the Mexican government are directly responsible for carrying out a lot of these crimes. So the spike in homicides, when we talk about these killings in Mexico, we don't want to fall into the trap of thinking of them as sort of the unfortunate byproduct of Mexico's drug war. They are a direct result of the U.S. policy to fund a militarized drug war in Mexico, right? So this is now gets into the question of U.S. neocolonial strategy in Latin America, right? Because the drug war is not a drug war in and of itself. It's part of a regional initiative by the United States, right? So that is where we need to think about things like Plan Colombia, which is very similar to the Merida Initiative, except with regard to Colombia and longer lasting, going back actually to the late days of the Clinton administration. Billions of dollars spent funding Colombia in a so-called drug war to stamp out the drugs at their source. Of course, that money has gone to corrupt government officials, to the killing of indigenous and union activists, to the intimidation of indigenous groups and social movements and so forth. All of that going on in Colombia, all of that with U.S. blood money. Similarly, Obama launched a relatively similar initiative for Central America, with particular focus on El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, in that region. That is known as CARSI. I don't have that in front of me, but I believe CARSI stands for Central American Regional Security Initiative. So again, modeled on the same model as Plan Colombia, on the same model as the Merida Initiative. So now you see Mexico, and then go a little further south, Central America, and then go further south, Colombia and South America. The United States, using drug wars as cover, has essentially militarized the entirety of Latin America, using drugs as a vehicle to do that, right? So when we're talking about a quote-unquote drug war, what we're really talking about is U.S. foreign policy. We're talking about U.S. imperialist policy. It's just that it is presented in a very different way. Again, you can see this in a variety of ways. I wrote about, it must be now at least 3-4 years ago that I wrote about it. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. But I've written about the surge in U.S. Special Forces operations throughout South America at the time when he was the head of Southcom. I think it was William McRaven, who later went on to be, I think, the head of forces in Afghanistan. McRaven was in charge of the Special Forces in Latin America, and he boasted about thousands and thousands of U.S. Special Forces being dispatched, missions around Latin America, thousands and thousands of them. I mean, it is mind-boggling to think just how embedded the U.S. military is in Latin America, and much of that is under the cover of fighting drugs. That is one of the primary pretexts by which the United States operates in Honduras. Remember that the United States overthrew the Zelaya government in Honduras in 2009. In the early days of the Bush administration, Hillary Clinton is one of the primary movers responsible for that. And since that time, the United States has used the issue of drugs and the flow of drugs and the attendant crime and migrant issues, refugee issues, etc., to militarize Honduras. Honduras is one of the most militarized countries in the world vis-a-vis U.S. military occupation forces. It is a foothold in Central America for the U.S. government, for the U.S. military, and drugs are one of, again, the primary pretexts under which the U.S. is able to do this. So when you look at things like Southcom, the Southern Command, U.S. military Southern Command for South America, when you look at these special forces throughout the region, when you look at all of these issues, and then you look at that in the context of saber rattling against Venezuela, destabilizing Bolivia, destabilizing Ecuador, saber rattling against the government in Mexico, or looking the other way at the killings of indigenous and union activists in Colombia, or whatever it is. When you look at what the United States does in Latin America, all of it has to be against the backdrop of drug war, anti-drug operations, counter-narcotics, which then, of course, is connected to counter-terrorism, counter-insurgency, all of these type of things. So this is really, I think, the crux of the issue here, is that the money that is poured into this region under the auspices of drug war is actually the money that is used to not only fuel the drugs, but it is also used to fuel the empire. It is to give the raison d'etre, as it were. I'm probably misusing the French term and probably badly mispronouncing it, but it is the reason for the U.S. presence. It is the excuse that the United States uses. So when we're talking about 21st century imperialism, it is intimately connected with capitalism, and it is intimately connected with drugs and with narcotics. And this is, I think, very, very clear. Now, to come back to this story in Mexico, though, we also have to keep in mind that Mexico is directly related to U.S. policy, right? So much of the poverty that we see is a result of U.S. economic policy. Much of the issues that have led many millions of Mexicans into the arms of the drug cartels are a direct result of U.S. policy, whether it is in the form of NAFTA, whether it is in the form of any number of U.S. initiatives. So we have to keep that in mind as well as we talk about all of these issues. So Merida in Mexico, Carsi in Central America, Plan Colombia for Colombia, all three of these represent the three of the pillars in U.S. Latin America military and counterinsurgency strategy. This is part and parcel of sort of the imperialist agenda for Latin America. Reading about Mexico and about the drug war is essentially reading about U.S. policy for the Western Hemisphere for the last 15 years. You have to understand that. It's a basic fundamental point. Once you get that, you're going to understand quite a lot about Latin America and about what the U.S. is doing. So Anyway, all right, again, to the Patreon page, patreon.com/Eric Draitser. $5 is all it takes. $5 a month, you get access to all the content, including a lot more stuff like this. If you like this kind of information, if you like to be able to use this to inform the way that you view a lot of the other events you're going to read about, please do consider supporting the work over at Patreon. Thanks. Talk to you soon. Peace.